A true story from Texas. Some moments split your life in two. There is who you were before the phone rang, and who you became after you answered it. I was asleep when it happened. The kind of shallow sleep that comes when your body is tired but your heart never quite rests. The house was quiet except for the old ceiling fan clicking like it had done for years. I remember thinking, just before the sound pierced the room, that I should oil it someday. Then the phone rang. Not the polite ring of daytime. Not the casual buzz of a friend. This was sharp, urgent, insistent. The kind that tells you before you even pick it up that something is wrong. I reached for the phone. My hand stiff. My joints slow. The clock on the nightstand glowed back at me. Far too late for good news. I answered without saying hello. Mom. The voice on the other end didn't belong to the man my son had become. It belonged to the child he once was. Frightened. Breathless. Breaking. Mom. Please. He said. The words tumbling over each other. If you don't help me, I'm done. I've ruined everything. I sat up slowly and turned on the lamp. Light spilled across the small bedroom, revealing the life I had built alone. A chipped dresser. A faded quilt. A framed photo of my son on graduation day, smiling like the world was still kind. Slow down. I said. Tell me what's happened. He inhaled sharply, like he was drowning and the air wasn't enough. It's the investments. The crypto stuff. I thought I knew what I was doing. Everyone was making money. Then the market crashed. I kept trying to fix it. Kept doubling down. I took out loans. I took a second mortgage on the house. I didn't tell Laura how bad it was. My stomach tightened. I owe people real money now. Mom. Not numbers on a screen. If I don't pay, they'll take the house. They'll take everything. I didn't speak. I listened. Mothers learn early that silence is sometimes the strongest thing they can offer. I can't sleep. He continued. Every knock at the door feels like the end. Lyra doesn't know the full amount. If she does, she'll leave. I swear I'm ruined. I closed my eyes. This was my only child. The boy I carried for 9 months. The baby I rocked through nights so hot the fan barely worked. The child I taught to read at the kitchen table because we couldn't afford tutors. How much? I asked. There was a pause. Then, barely louder than a breath. 80,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the room again. Everything I owned. Everything I had left of a lifetime of work. Barely filled that small space. I had already downsized. Already let go. Already learned how little a person truly needs. I'll talk to you in the morning. I said finally. He thanked me too quickly. Promised things too fast. Then the line went dead. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with an old coffee mug and watched the night fade into morning. I thought about the years behind me. About raising a child alone after his father left. About working double shifts. About choosing groceries over new shoes. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I didn't make it out of fear. I made it out of love. The dangerous kind. That morning, I drove to the bank. Morning light has a way of exposing truths you manage to avoid in the dark. I stood at the kitchen sink watching the sun creep across the counter, turning dust into something almost beautiful. The house was quiet. No laughter. No footsteps. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that had outlived most of the furniture around it. This house had seen everything. Birthday candles blown out with wishes whispered into smoke. School papers spread across the table. Nights when I cried quietly into dish towels so my son wouldn't hear. And now, it was about to see me leave. I dressed slowly, choosing my oldest coat, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and winter. I gathered folders I hadn't opened in years, mortgage papers, insurance forms, bank statements folded thin from being reread too often. I didn't cry. Not yet. At the bank, the air was cool and smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and paper. The loan officer was younger than my son. She spoke gently, the way people do when they sense a fragile thing. You're asking to liquidate everything, she said, scanning the documents. Your home equity, your pension, your savings. Yes. She hesitated. This will leave you vulnerable. I almost laughed. Vulnerable was a word I had known my whole life. I've raised a child alone. I said, I know what risk feels like. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Paper slid across the desk. Pens clicked. My name was written again and again until it felt less like a signature and more like a surrender. The process took weeks. Weeks of waiting. Weeks of selling pieces of myself quietly. I sold the house to a private buyer. No open house. No farewell party. Just an envelope and a handshake. I packed what married photos. Letters. The quilt my mother had sewn when I was pregnant. I moved into a small rental near the church. 1 bedroom. Thin walls. A place meant for passing through. Not staying. When the cashier's check was finally placed in my hands, the number printed on it felt unreal. A lifetime reduced to ink. I called my son. He met me at the bank. Eyes red. Shoulders slumped. He hugged me like someone clinging to the last piece of wood after a shipwreck. I owe you my life. He whispered. I believed him. The payment cleared. The debt vanished. His house was safe. As we walked to the car, he smiled for the first time in weeks. You'll stay with us. Right? He said. It's only fair. Only fair. I nodded. That night, in my small apartment, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, I told myself this was the turning point. That love, finally, would be returned. I didn't know then that love, when mixed with entitlement, curdles, the ungrateful roof moving into my son's house felt like stepping into someone else's life wearing borrowed shoes. Nothing fit. The walls were freshly painted in colors I hadn't chosen. The furniture was modern, sharp-edged, untouched by history. There were no photographs of me anywhere. Not on the walls, not on the shelves. It was as if I had arrived not as a mother, but as a temporary inconvenience. My room was the smallest one in the house. A narrow bed, a single lamp, a window that faced a brick wall. You don't need much space, my daughter-in-law said lightly, as if explaining a design choice. I smiled. I had learned long ago that smiles were cheaper than arguments. At first, I tried to be invisible. I woke early, made coffee quietly, folded laundry that wasn't mine, cleaned kitchens already clean. I told myself this was gratitude. That love meant effort. But effort, when expected and never acknowledged, becomes exhaustion. Rules appeared without being announced. Don't use the living room during work calls. Don't cook foods that smell. Don't invite church friends over. Every rule wrapped itself around my chest like wire. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the hallway. She's here all the time, my daughter-in-law said. It's suffocating. She won't be forever. My son replied. Just until things stabilize. Stabilize. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. This was not what I had imagined when I signed my life away at that bank desk. The first real crack came at dinner. I had cooked my son's favorite meal, meatloaf, the way he loved it as a child. He barely looked up from his phone. This is too salty, my daughter-in-law said, pushing her plate away. I apologized immediately. Later that night, I heard laughter from the living room. A show playing, glasses clinking. No one had invited me. I sat on my bed, staring at the quilt my mother had sewn decades ago, and wondered how a house paid for with my blood could feel so cold. The next morning, my daughter-in-law handed me a list. Since you're not working, she said, you can help more around the house. The list was long. Laundry, groceries, babysitting on weekends. No thank you at the bottom. No acknowledgement at the top. I nodded. That night, I cried silently again, like I used to when my son was young. Except this time, the tears weren't for him. They were for me. When respect dies quietly, disrespect doesn't arrive all at once. It slips in gently, disguised as tone, as jokes, as sighs that linger a second too long. I began to notice how my presence changed the air in the room. Conversations stopped when I entered. Laughter softened. Doors closed more often. I told myself I was imagining it. One afternoon, I overheard my name again. She watches everything, my daughter-in-law said. It's uncomfortable. I don't think she means to. My son replied, but his voice lacked conviction. She just doesn't have anywhere else. That sentence landed like a verdict. Didn't have anywhere else. I started spending more time outside the house. Long walks with no destination. Sitting on park benches, watching strangers live their lives. At least there, no one looked at me like an obligation. When I returned, the house felt tighter, smaller. The incident that broke something inside me happened over something small. A mug. It was chipped, old, and mined. A gift from my late husband. I kept it in the back of the cabinet. One morning, I found it missing. Oh, I threw that out. My daughter-in-law said casually. It was ugly. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it again. What do you say when someone discards your memories like trash? That night, my son asked me to lower the television volume in my room. You can hear it through the wall. He said, we need quiet. I nodded. The night of realization, the night I was locked out, was the night everything crystallized. I had returned from the grocery store with a list of items for the week. 2 bags of food. Nothing extraordinary. Just what a mother would bring for her family. I reached for the key, and it didn't fit. I jiggled it, twisted it. Nothing. Panic rose, then settled into a cold, sharp clarity. They had changed the locks. I rang the bell, knocked, texted my son. No answer. Calls went to voicemail. I sat on the porch, grocery bags at my side, lasagna pan still in one of them, and laughed quietly. Bitter laughter. The realization hit me. They did not value me. Not as a mother. Not as a person. Not even as a human being. And that was their mistake. I called a cab and whispered to myself, it's time to remember who owns what. I left with nothing but 2 bags. A bruised heart. And a mind sharper than it had been in years. They thought they had broken me. What they did not know was that the $80,000 I had given to clear the debt had been legally structured in a way only I truly understood. My son and his wife thought they owned the house. They didn't. I did. I moved into a small, modest apartment near the church I had once attended. 1 bedroom. No view. But clean and quiet. The landlord, a kind widow, Eileen, greeted me with a knowing smile. You've been through something, haven't you? I nodded. That was all we ever spoke of. Over the next few days, I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes into unfamiliar drawers, arranged old pictures on the windowsill. Each night, I brewed tea and let the silence settle over me like a protective blanket. No one called. No one checked. I was alone. Truly. For the first time in decades. But I was not helpless. I had played my hand carefully when I paid off the debt. I had structured the loan so the property was collateral, with my name as the official borrower. A subtle move in the fine print. They thought they had control. They didn't. Now, for the first time, I felt the weight of power in my own hands. Quiet, legal, undeniable. I whispered to myself, let them see what a ghost can do. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. Because for once, I wasn't giving. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't waiting. I was owning my life. Taking back control. Days turned into weeks in the small apartment. Each morning began the same way. Tea, silence, and the comforting routine of folding laundry while the sun poured softly through the blinds. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: control. Real, unshakable, mine. I reviewed the documents again, confirming everything was in order. Every paper, every signature, every clause meticulous, solid. I had spent decades caring for my family, sacrificing without recognition, and now the legal system had unwittingly given me leverage. The irony was not lost on me. One morning, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, children playing in the distance, neighbors exchanging greetings. I realized that for the first time, I was truly seen as me. Not as someone's mother, someone's burden, someone's shadow. I breathed deeply, letting the sunlight wash over me. Freedom felt like a warm current running through my chest. At the church, I reconnected with old friends and volunteers. Dolores, who slept under the bridge, smiled at me and asked about the new apartment. Kenny, who had lost everything, clapped me on the shoulder. They didn't know about my son or the debt. It didn't matter. I was no longer living for recognition. I was living for myself. The next call came from my son. Hesitant, almost timid. He said, "Mom, we need to talk about the house, about the cafe." I stayed silent, letting him feel the weight of the months. The silence, the absence of control he had taken for granted. "I understand," he continued, "that we can't proceed without your signature. Can we meet?" I agreed to meet, not to beg or plead, but to teach a lesson in dignity. When I arrived, I saw their nervous faces, the tremor in his voice, the slight tremble in hers. I laid the documents on the table. My eyes were calm, steady, and unyielding. "This is the repayment demand," I said softly but firmly. $100,000 principal plus 12% interest. Standard. This is what you owe. If you want your house free and clear, it must be repaid. Samantha gasped, her mascara smudged from the tears she couldn't hold back. My son's eyes widened, the realization hitting him fully for the first time. He had not considered the consequences, the weight of actions taken lightly. Words said cruelly, "You cannot be serious." Samantha whispered, "I am." I replied, "You borrowed from me. You locked me out of the house I helped save. You pretended I never existed. This is not revenge. It is accountability." He looked at me, really looked at me. The son I had nurtured, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the young man I had raised with love, now facing the full measure of his choices. For the first time, I saw remorse, not because of guilt, but because the truth had been revealed. Samantha tried to protest. "We spent everything. We've invested in our future. The cafe, the equipment." I nodded slowly, folding my hands. "You gambled with something you never owned. I gave. You lost sight of what matters. Now it's time to honor what is real." Silence fell. The air was thick with recognition. They understood. Not fully, not completely, but enough to pause, to breathe, to absorb the lesson. I let them sit in that silence, to feel the weight they had imposed, to realize that respect cannot be demanded, only earned, and often only recognized after it has been lost. That night, I returned to my apartment. The silence was no longer heavy. It was cleansing. I made soup from scratch, the aroma filling the small kitchen. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in a soft blanket, and finally smiled without apology. I was not bitter. I was not seeking revenge. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, my right to be seen and valued. And in that quiet reclaiming, I found peace. Real, unshakable, mine. Closure and NEW beginnings. The days following the confrontation were strangely quiet. My son and Samantha no longer called daily. No more apologies. No frantic messages. It was as if the universe had pressed pause to let the consequences settle in. I spent my mornings with tea in hand, observing the sunlight crawl along the floorboards, listening to birdsong I had never noticed when my heart was heavy with worry. I began to rebuild the life I had postponed for decades. Small things first. Organizing my little apartment, planting herbs on the windowsill, making bread for myself, not for anyone else. The simple acts reminded me of my autonomy, my power to nurture without being consumed. Slowly, I allowed myself to dream again, not for my son or his family, but for me. I explored new hobbies, revisited old friends, and reconnected with the church community that had become my sanctuary. Each step, however small, was a declaration of self-worth. One crisp autumn morning, a package arrived, a photo slipped inside. Unsigned, it was of a foundation being poured, beams rising in an orderly manner. The note was simple: Future Home RM Talbot, 2025. My heart swelled with a quiet satisfaction. I had sold my son's house, and with the proceeds, I was building a new life on my own terms. No resentment, no bitterness, just clarity and autonomy. The walls, the beams, the space, it was mine, wholly and unapologetically. Weeks later, my son called. His voice, stripped of pride and excuses, trembled. "Mom, I understand now. I see what I lost. But, is it too late?" I listened, not with anger, not with gloating, but with calm resolve. "It's never too late to begin again," I said, "but I don't pay twice for the same lesson." His tears were audible, but I hung up knowing he had learned, truly learned, the cost of ingratitude and disrespect. In those moments, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about money, or debts, or even the house. It was about dignity, about knowing your value, and about refusing to be diminished by those who were blind to the sacrifices you made. I planted my roots firmly in my own soil, growing quietly, resiliently. Each sunrise reminded me that my life was mine, that I could love without losing myself. And that strength comes from holding your ground, even when those you cherish falter. I became a quiet force in my community, volunteering, mentoring, and nurturing without expectation. I laughed again, cried again, and felt joy in ways I hadn't allowed myself for years. I learned to savor mornings, sunsets, the fragrance of flowers, and the warmth of a cup of tea. Life had stripped me of illusions, but it had given me clarity. And in that clarity, I discovered freedom. I was no longer the woman they whispered about behind closed doors. I was not the burden or the shadow. I was the lesson, the strength, the resilience that comes from standing tall when everyone else doubts you. I had given, I had suffered, I had been dismissed, and I had risen. Now, as I sit by my window, the wind carrying the scent of autumn leaves, I smile. My son may never fully understand, and perhaps he will stumble again, but that is no longer my burden. I am whole, I am seen, and I am living a life built on truth, dignity, and self-respect. This is the ending I chose, not by chance, but by will, and it is mine alone. I am Ruth M. Talbot. I reclaimed my life, my soul, my power, and in doing so, I found peace, not revenge, not victory over others, just the quiet triumph of a woman who remembers herself and refuses to be forgotten. The end.